Joining me now to talk about college football's championship game, Dan Wolken of USA Today. Dan, thanks for taking a couple minutes here. This certainly feels like a David versus Goliath matchup. I mean, is that how this is being billed?
Well, when you've got a team like Georgia that is a defending national champion, they've been on an incredible 2-year run. They recruit at the highest level. Really, I think over the last 5 years, they've probably done a better job on signing day than any program in the country. And then on the other end, you've got TCU. I mean, this is a program that, I remember when I started covering college football, 2000, 2001, they were making their way from Conference USA to the Mountain West. And so if you just look at 20 years, the way that they have exploded as a program, they've gotten some big moments and they've had some highs, but never anything like this. You just don't ever start a season expecting TCU to get there, especially when they had a losing record last year. They fired Gary Patterson, first-year coach. So it's a total shock. I think they are probably the most unlikely team in the modern era to ever play for a national title. So, I don't know if that's David or Goliath, but I do think that it's definitely a matchup that should favor Georgia. But as TCU's shown all year, if you don't take them seriously, they are good enough to scrap out wins in a variety of ways, and they've had a very admirable season.
Yeah, speaking with a reporter who covers TCU, and they actually predicted a win over Michigan. They said this is a team that's got 4 or 5 guys that are NFL caliber players, and they like having that bulletin board material, the chip on their shoulder mentality, despite the fact that they really weren't touted as one of the top teams in the country. Even as the season was beginning, they really feel like they belong here. I mean, what has impressed you specifically about TCU, their style of play heading into this championship game?
Well, they've just won games a lot of different kinds of ways. They've won with offense. They've had performances like against Texas, for instance, where they were dominant defensively. I think against Michigan, the big question mark was in the trenches. Could they match the physicality of Michigan? And not only did they do that, they were really the more physical team in that game. So I just feel like, they've got a lot of speed. That's I think a lot of their success, especially on defense. And look, I'm not going to sit here and say they're a great defense. I think the numbers show they're ranked somewhere in the 60s nationally in terms of yards per play, but they're resourceful and they do seem to play well in big games. So look, this is a year that I don't think anybody saw coming from TCU, but once it started and they were able to beat people, they were able to come from behind. You're just kind of waiting for the hourglass to run out, but it never did. And they seem to have gotten better late in the season. I thought they were very, very well prepared for that Michigan team. And we'll see. We'll see what they can do against a program like Georgia that has incredible talent at really every position and really a lot more depth than TCU.
Where do you think this game will ultimately be won or lost?
Yeah, I think Max Duggan's going to have a remarkable game throwing the ball because I think Georgia, look, they're not as good defensively as they were a year ago. They lost all those guys to the NFL draft. They've taken a step back on that side of the ball. And I think you've seen the last couple of weeks when they played LSU in the SEC championship game, when they played Ohio State, you can make plays against their secondary, but you've got to have a quarterback who will hang in the pocket, can get away from pressure, and can deliver downfield. And, Duggan is a great runner. I think they're going to certainly try to find ways with that offense to move him on the ground, churn out first downs, and then try to use that to set up some deep shots. But when it's there, he's got to put the ball in the money and make the plays. I just think Georgia's a team that will give you opportunities, but if you don't cash them in, I think it's going to be really, really hard to keep up.
Georgia also coming off one of the more exciting games in college football history against Ohio State. I mean, that kept you on the edge of your seat all night, right until the ball dropped and we kicked off 2023. Do you expect any kind of hangover from a game like that, or will that be a motivating factor for Georgia? Do you expect heading into the national title game? Not that you would need anything else with being able to add another championship to the list on the line.
Yeah, I certainly think one of the factors in this game is going to be which team bounces back emotionally quicker. Because there's no question, I think for both TCU and for Georgia, what they went through on New Year's Eve was emotionally and physically draining. I mean, you think about just how back and forth that game was against Michigan, the third quarter with all those points. TCU kind of had to just survive at the end. That takes a lot out of you, as does what happened to Georgia, where, I mean, they were down most of that game against Ohio State, and yet they are able to mount a furious fourth quarter comeback to go up at the very, very end and then hold off a final drive from C.J. Stroud, a missed 50-yard field goal. I was there, and at the end of that game, very clearly, they were just tired because that kind of game does take it out of you. So, everyone's had a little more than a week to prepare, to get ready and recuperate, but is somebody going to come out flat a little bit? That could make a difference. That could allow somebody to get off to, that 14-0 start that may put you in position to control the game. But I don't know which team that's going to be, and I think they're both in that scenario where they got to bounce back emotionally fast.
If Georgia's able to win another championship here, is that enough, do you think, to, I don't want to say unseat, but certainly add more credence to the conversation that they are perhaps the marquee program in the country, outside of Alabama? I don't know if that's the right way to put it, but we of course know what Alabama football has been. We know who Nick Saban is. Georgia, the last couple of seasons, has made a pretty compelling case that they are, in fact, a legitimate powerhouse. Is that enough, do you think, or will nothing really change in that regard?
Yeah, I think you could make an argument right now that Georgia's the best program in the country. If they go back-to-back national titles, which is really something that hardly ever happens. Maybe once every decade or two you see a team able to do that. I think you could argue they've already surpassed Alabama as the top of the mountain in this sport. And I think that for Georgia, they are just right now recruiting at a level where they're going to be hard to catch. Now season to season, there's certainly going to be variance. We'll see what Alabama does next year. They're going to have some quarterback questions. Georgia's going to have some quarterback questions. But certainly I think Alabama, right now they've been passed a little bit. And it's not just a one-on-one thing. There's other great programs out there. But I think Kirby Smart's taken the blueprint that he learned in Tuscaloosa. He's implemented it at Georgia, put his own twist on it. And in some ways, just right now, not the last decade, but right now, I think they've kind of surpassed even what Alabama's done.
And is he the one that really deserves the credit for the way that they've been able to recruit? I mean, obviously you have to buy what he is selling.
Look, I think most people who followed college football closely over the last 20 years have pointed at the Georgia job as one that if the right person got in there and you had the right administration and everybody was aligned, that's the best job in the country. You just look at the geography. It's an hour from Atlanta. Over the last 20 years, Atlanta's just putting out incredible high school talent in the city, in the suburbs, all over the state. So if you have the ability to get the best players in the state of Georgia and then also go outside, in the South and even across the country. I mean, Brock Bowers, the incredible tight end, he's from Napa, California. It's a great place. I mean, Athens is a very attractive campus and college community. So I don't think that anybody in college football is surprised that Georgia, with the right coach and sort of the right backing, is able to do this. I just think maybe they had underachieved a little bit, and now Kirby Smart, because of what he learned at Alabama, has been able to figure out how to put it all together.
If Georgia loses this game, why do you think it will be?
Yeah, I mean, look, you could always point to turnovers, as a reason why. I mean, Stetson Bennett, threw a bad pick and a couple bad picks in that game against Ohio State. He can be a little bit of a gunslinger and get himself into trouble at times. And then I think also just their defense. Like right now, and Kirby Smart mentioned it on the conference call this week, they're a little bit banged up at some key positions, and they may have to rely more than they want to on some younger guys, on some freshmen. So they're a little bit vulnerable back there. And if TCU is able to, complete some big plays and get some rhythm in the passing game, and then Georgia turns it over a time or two, then yeah, certainly I think that's the recipe for TCU to come out with a win.
You mentioned Brock Bowers and some of the other weapons that they have. I mean, their approach offensively as they look at this game, and to your credit, I mean, to your point, a TCU team that's averaging more than 40 points a game, for their game plan offensively for Georgia's, are they better off not targeting one or two running backs or receivers who are really going to carry the load for them and spread it around and just use everybody a little bit more, if that makes sense?
I don't think Georgia ever really goes into a game focusing on one person, because they are blessed with just so much skill at every position on their offense. Now, they may be down one of their tight ends, but they have the most talented tight end room you'll ever see in college football. They have a lot of receivers, and just guys like A.D. Mitchell, who had been hurt for a lot of the season, comes back and makes a huge contribution in the title game. They kind of rotate running backs. Nobody carries it really more than about 10 times a game. So I don't think Georgia ever goes into it saying, we need this guy or that guy to step up on offense and be our guy who takes us down the field and score touchdowns. I think what they do is put the ball in the hands of Stetson Bennett and say, all right, here's how they're going to play us defensively. We got to find the weak spots. And because we have so much talent, it doesn't really matter who gets the ball, because everybody we put out there on offense at the skill positions has the potential to make a big play.
You mentioned Stetson Bennett maybe being inconsistent at times, but does he deserve more credit for being able to read things real time and having all those weapons at his disposal? And really with the coaching staff, I think, if I'm interpreting correctly what you're saying, kind of placing the faith in him to say, listen, read the weak spots in the defense and hit who we need to hit and make it happen.
I would hope by this point that everybody's kind of put the whole Stetson Bennett former walk-on thing in the rearview mirror. I mean, he's been the starting quarterback for 2 years now. He's won every game in that span except for one, which was the SEC championship game against Alabama. And during all those games, I mean, how many big plays has he made? How many clutch throws? The last two drives against Ohio State, he's dropping dimes that they had to have. So I just don't really think there's any debate anymore. Stetson Bennett is a great college quarterback. Now, should he have been at the Heisman ceremony? All that stuff. Is he going to be an NFL guy? Who cares? Like, as far as I'm concerned, he has made enough big plays in big games over the course of his career. Yeah, he's got a lot of talent around him, but there's got to be a guy making the throws, making the decisions, making the reads. And he's done that as well as anybody in the country over the last 2 years.
When you look at the coaching staffs on both sides of this matchup, who do you think has the advantage?
Well, I think they're both really good coaching staffs. I mean, Kirby Smart, having won a national title, I think since he has gotten to Georgia, he's gotten a lot better at managing a game, at making adjustments in a game. I think early in his tenure, there was a period where, sometimes he maybe got a little bit frazzled and his decision-making on the sidelines was questionable. But I think he's matured. He's gained experience. I think you look at just little things like in that Peach Bowl where he calls the timeout, recognizing the formation that Ohio State's about to fake punt and gets the timeout in right as it is about to happen. Really, that play might have saved the game for Georgia there. So, look, I think you have to say that the Georgia coaching staff, and by the way, I mean, Todd Monken does an unbelievable job. They throw so many different things and looks out there offensively. They're very creative. They've done a really good job there. But TCU's got a great staff too. I mean, Sonny Dykes is really, one of the great offensive coaches of this era. They put up a lot of points at every stop he's had. So I think really, really well-coached teams. And I think you don't get to this point without being that.
Do you expect this to be sort of a back and forth, high scoring, really entertaining national championship game? I mean, I know I'm asking you to look into the crystal ball here, but how do you see this shaking out?
Yeah, I just think right now in college football, the execution level it takes to get to a game like this is very high. And that's why we tend to see shootouts in playoff games, in national championship games, because, don't care how good you are defensively. When an offense is executing at a really high level, it's just very, very hard to stop. And, I think for both teams, you kind of go into this game thinking you're going to allow 35 points. And the question is, how do you get to 36? Maybe it'll even be more than that, but you're really focusing on offensive execution here and then just being very opportunistic with your defense. If you get a team in a 2nd and 20 because you got a holding penalty or because you got a sack, you got to finish that off defensively and get the ball back. I think those are the kind of things coaches look for now, not necessarily expecting a lot of 3 and outs and holding teams to 17 points.
And so you expect this to be a more quality matchup, given everything that TCU has done to get to this point. The fact that everybody's kind of waiting for that letdown game where you go, oh, this is who TCU was. And they haven't seemingly done that all season long. I mean, they just beat Michigan. You don't expect that this is going to be a championship game that's going to let people down, so to speak, in terms of the quality of the offense.
I think TCU is good enough to be in this game. I think maybe, they could even be in that lead at halftime. I wouldn't be surprised by that whatsoever. I think over the course of the game, as you get into the 3rd and 4th quarter, I think Georgia's depth, I think their offensive line will have an effect on the game. I can see Georgia pulling away a little bit in the 4th quarter, but I don't necessarily think we're going to see one of those runaways that's over in the first 5 or 7 minutes. Because I do have a lot of respect for TCU, and I do think Georgia's defense is just vulnerable enough that TCU is going to score some points.
Dan Wolken of USA Today, national columnist covering college football. Thanks so much for being with us.
You got it. Thank you.